purpose here is to give you sort of a snapshot, a 50,000-foot view of what the industry and what the FDA regulations really look like, and to give you a perspective on what change has taken place in the global pharmaceutical area, which, of course, encompasses medical devices. The prescription drug segment of the business is one which is dominated by the research-based companies that are doing the expensive, innovative research of new chemical entities. They are driven by, obviously, profit motivations. But there's an interesting phenomenon that's taken place with the prescription drug business, and that is, for the first time last year, in recent years, the number of prescriptions written in the United States has actually declined. And the reason for that is that the decline in prescriptions actually takes pressure off of Medicare and Medicaid funding, which is becoming scarce. And while fewer prescriptions are being written, more over-the-counter drugs are being sold. And when I say over-the-counter drugs, I also mean over-the-counter devices. In fact, OTCs are up 4% and prescription products are down 2% over the last year. The intellectual property which relates to the prescription drug business is known as the Approved New Drug Application, or NDA. All drugs which come to the marketplace are by law defined as new drugs. And one would think, logically, that a system which depended for its definition on a term like new drugs would have, as an opposite term, old drugs, but there is no such thing. Once you are a new drug, you're always a new drug. And you can have a new drug for 30, 40, or 50 years, and it will never lose its regulatory status as a new drug. It may, in fact, become switched, moved from a prescription status to over-the-counter status, but it will still be under the regulatory authority of a new drug. And so, when you hear new, think of a regulatory classification which gives FDA the mandatory controls over that substance rather than thinking of it in terms of time. Now, because of the decline in, first, fewer pharmaceutical companies are in the business. Secondly, fewer prescriptions are being written. Most research-based companies are now diversified and will have separate branches dealing with medical devices, over-the-counter drugs, dietary supplements, and in some cases foods. There is a segment of the prescription drug business which is not research-based. It is development-based. If you think of the traditional R&D, they look only at D and not at R. One characterization of those might be the companies who are involved in the manufacture of generic drugs. The reason it's of interest is it is the same regulatory set that the research-intensive companies follow. However, there are important differences in terms of exclusivity in the marketplace. This is where some of my colleagues in intellectual property spend a lot of time looking at questions of innovative, exclusive marketing of new chemical entities and the incentives that are provided under the Hatch-Waxman Act to do so. I would also point out that as you're looking at the development of new pharmaceutical entities, the regulatory structure of getting the NDA, or the New Drug Application, approved is a different structure than the mechanism for getting reimbursement. And reimbursement, of course, is a necessary prerequisite to many of the new products that are being offered, especially for an aging population. The over-the-counter segment is very much a dynamic segment, and I think you will find that it will continue to be dynamic because of the pressures on Medicare and Medicaid. While traditionally it has been the motivation of FDA to keep the traditional notions of separation between over-the-counter and RX drugs, there is increasing pressure to take chronic illness and other illnesses that can be managed by the individual and move them to the OTC side. And so you're going to see over the next few years much more push for cholesterol management, hypertension management, because each time one of these major drugs is moved, you're essentially going from a reimbursement scheme that is taxing Medicare and Medicaid to a consumer-funded, non-reimbursed scheme, which is venting some of the pressure, political pressure that exists on the system. The difference between the over-the-counter system and the RX system is largely one of distribution. They both are driven by intellectual property. In the case of prescription drugs, the intellectual property are the patents and, to some extent, the existence of the NDA. On the OTC side, the intellectual property is very much the trademark. It is the branding. It is the identification of the product in the consumer's mind, built by the drivers of print, radio, television, social media advertising. The over-the-counter segment is also divided in the same way the prescription segment is divided between prescription and contract manufacturers who provide generic drugs. The OTC segment is divided into branded products and then store-branded products, products like the Equate line at Walmart. And there is constant pressure between, especially the large drug chains and the mass media firms, to get that share of market. The switch, yes, sir.
Something is always, a lot of my students ask, a store-branded product, is that typically made by the branded pharmaceutical manufacturer, but just private label that to the store? Is it the same stuff? Same company?
Very rarely. It is the objective of the big box merchandiser or the chain pharmaceutical firm to make you believe that. And in many cases, they will adopt trade dress and styling to cause you to believe that. And they will sometimes call out, compare to, and put the brand on it. And I can tell you, because most of my clients are in the branded business, I do represent some contract manufacturers, it is a constant tug of war. And so I can only think of one case where sort of reluctantly the manufacturer is dragged to providing a private label alternative to the branded product that they want to sell. It's normally the knockoff product is made by someone who specializes in doing just that. The over-the-counter segment is regulated not through the new drug system by and large, but through a system known as the monograph system. The monographs are actually regulations that are published by the government in the Code of Federal Regulations. And monographs provide recipes. The recipe will provide the ingredients, it'll provide the required warnings, cautions, conditions for use, and so forth. And there is, importantly, no precondition. You do not have to file an application to be in the over-the-counter monograph drug business. You can, if you follow the recipe, you can be there immediately. And that is the mechanism that separated the prescription from the over-the-counter business for years and years. However, back about 1980, we really started to see the emergence of switch drugs. The one that you probably are most familiar with would be ibuprofen, which was switched as Advil and Nuprin back in the early 80s. And although the dose of 200 milligram tablets of ibuprofen was the same as Upjohn's 400 milligram prescription dose, it became an over-the-counter drug, but still maintained its new drug status. And so you had the anomaly that you had somewhat different labeling, of course. You had issues as to whether the consumer could understand the circumstances under which they were being asked to take the product. You had questions of compliance, and you had other issues, but it became the forerunner for what is now a vast movement. And in fact, there are many, many more products than simply, ibuprofen that are available over the counter. And in fact, it has transformed the over-the-counter drug business so that now many of the large players in this space do not rely only on monograph drugs, but sell a combination of monograph and new drugs. And this has caused some cultural and dynamic shifts within the pharma community. It is not the same pharmaceutical industry that your grandpa knew. And the over-the-counter segment is actually the growth engine now for the over-the-counter segment. And they will be looking aggressively to expand that growth engine. And my clients are looking every day to take their existing skill sets, which are largely in devising marketing, devising selling strategies, devising promotions with the trade, because again, the primary differences here are the value of intellectual property other than patents and other than the NDAs. So we're looking at building consumer franchises, having consumer awareness. To your point, trying to make the consumer want that branded product as opposed to, an imitation of the branded product. The new drug process is not going to go away. And for new molecules, new chemical entities, it is still going to be the mechanism that must be fixed. NDA is going to require preclinical and clinical studies. It meets the substantial evidence standard. By substantial evidence, I mean the evidence, when reviewed by an FDA reviewer, meets an objective standard of substantial evidence of safety and effectiveness. FDA looks at the clinical evidence that has been amassed, looks at the circumstances, expects, especially in the case of new chemical entities, for those products to be administered under the supervision of the physician. They expect and anticipate extensive reporting through the adverse reporting systems. They expect that the manufacturing will take place in establishments in the United States which are subject to inspection, which are registered, or if they're not in the United States, that they are registered with the United States and also subject to inspection. The mechanism by which drug quality is addressed is known as the GMP system, and that's current good manufacturing practices. And while there are regulations that you can find in 21 CFR, there is no such thing as a static GMP. GMP is a constantly raising bar, and it's supposed to reflect the status of an emerging and more sophisticated pharmaceutical industry that learns as it goes how to improve itself and to self-police itself. The GMP system has changed dramatically over the course of my career. Things that were accepted as part of GMPs in the 80s are no longer acceptable. Things like mixing batches that are out of compliance. I could give you a lot of different illustrations of things that have changed. And the only way that you really can stay, sort of conversant with GMPs is to keep watch over what's going on within the regulated community. On the FDA website, you can go to a section where they list the warning letters that have been issued. And if you have a class of trade that you're interested in, whether it happens to be manufacturing dietary supplements or selling pacemakers or whatever it happened to be, if you looked at the warning letters that have issued and see what FDA inspectors are calling out as the hot button issues currently, you'll learn more about what GMPs are than any set of regulations that you could read in the Code of Federal Regulations. It is important to know, I think, that an approved NDA is not a legal document. I don't sit in my office and draft NDAs. NDAs are medical scientific documents. I can contribute often some strategic thinking, some advice as to positioning, strategy, and so forth, but it is not a legal document. It is a medical and scientific document, and should stay that way. You may have seen some of the discussion lately about the Plan B controversy. Extremely interesting to me because over the years the FDA has tried to insulate itself from the political process. And in the Plan B situation, you saw that the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration approved a drug and the Secretary of HHS disapproved the drug on the same day. That was unheard of, and I think the decision in the district court in New York is somewhat encouraging to those of us who practice in this area. Let the FDA practice, medicine and the regulation of pharmaceuticals, and let, politics be politics. The generic side of the prescription business generally relies not on new drug applications, but abbreviated new drug applications. And the reason is logical. The pioneers in the prescription drug business actually do the work that demonstrate the efficacy of the product. When you get to the abbreviated NDA, it has the same, effect, the same legal status. It is an approved drug. However, we're not going back to reinvent the wheel and prove things from the beginning. We're now proving the equivalence of the second comer, the generic drug, to the pioneer drug. And so ANDAs have an important place in the entire universe of drug manufacturing and in competition, but it is a for purposes of FDA's regulatory status, deemed equivalent. And what that means is, in many cases, for persons who have an interest in offering what was a prescription drug as a switch drug, by having generic manufacturers who have that capability, it is often possible to go to an ANDA as the regulatory authority for establishing a switch drug in the marketplace. I might mention that the jurisdictional basis for FDA regulation actually comes from admiralty law, which is something that is at least non-intuitive. But admiralty law is jurisdiction in rem. And for those of you who can't remember your high school Latin, in rem means jurisdiction over the thing. And so where FDA gets its authority to regulate a product is product moving in interstate commerce. And I can tell you as a matter of personal experience, when an FDA inspector comes into your facility, the first thing he will want to do is to establish that your product has moved in interstate commerce. Then they can go backwards and look at other questions. And the FDA over the years has been very creative. Once they've established jurisdiction, the events which make a drug or device article moving in commerce to be illegal is that the drug or device is deemed to be either adulterated or misbranded. And adulteration, think about adding water to milk. That's adulteration. Think about adding a foreign substance to something that's supposed to have purity. That's adulteration. Misbranding is a mislabel. Having a product which is supposed to be orange juice that is actually grapefruit juice. That's misbranding. And so to be creative and to get to where the FDA has wanted to be, they have used the GMP system, the quality system in the case of devices, and said if you do not manufacture your products to conform to GMPs or to the quality system, it is a constructive misbranding. And that constructive misbranding is what gives them jurisdiction. And the jurisdiction is very acute, because it's not something that FDA has taken a position and you can go down to your local courthouse and argue about it. They have the right, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, to actually seize the product. It's in rem. They can take the product. And they can take the product and hold it. You can have your day in court. But FDA is a very formidable opponent when it comes to public policy and arguing before judges who, by and large, are not scientifically trained. And so their enforcement cloud is quite extreme. But understanding that FDA's approach to substances that are moving in commerce, in rem jurisdiction over the thing, they can seize it, they can prevent it from moving, they can basically shut you down that way, puts them in a very superior negotiating position. It puts you in a position where you really want to know what GMPs look like for your particular business by reading warning letters, reading what are known as 483s, that are notices of inspection for people who would be viewed as your competitor, seeing what's on the cutting edge. And it is no different. The misbranding and adulteration is no different for monograph drugs as it is for new drugs. It's the same authority. It's the same concepts that you haven't manufactured the product to meet good manufacturing practice requirements or quality requirements, and whether the device is over the counter or a prescription device, it is the same statutory authority.